joining us today and for this afternoon for our discussion with the Vice President for the Middle East and North Africa, Ferid Belhaj, on the outlook for the region and the World Bank MENA strategy for the region. Ferid is not only a friend, but was also previously the World Bank Director in Beirut, so he's probably well known to most of you or most of the audience. So it's absolutely wonderful to have you back with us, Ferid, even if it's for a fleeting visit. Do you want to say a few words before I start with the questions?
I'd love to say a couple of things. One is, first, thank you so very much. It's really great to see you again, Maha. It's always a pleasure, obviously, and great to be back in Beirut, and great to see, this fantastic audience. Frankly, I wasn't expecting, that many people interested in what the bank has to say and what the bank is doing. But then again, it's great to have this conversation with you. I'll say a few words, make a broad presentation, and then what would really be interesting is to have a conversation with you, get your feedback, get your pushback, or get your, how should I put it, suggestions as to how we should, correct course wherever there is a course correction that is needed, or, keep pushing wherever you believe that we are doing the right thing. So, again, thank you so very much.
It's a pleasure. Basically, the format we're going to follow today is I have a few questions for Ferid. So I'll be asking these questions, and then we will open it up to the audience for your Q&A as well. Ferid, you're about to release the new MENA strategy. How do you see it's based on key pillars. We'll talk about the strategy in a second. But I wanted to sort of ask you a little bit how you see the economic and social outlook for the region in the coming few years, and what are the key challenges and maybe windows of opportunity, so that we're not just focusing on the challenges that I think make most of us quite miserable.
No, look, at the end of the day, the way I and we in the bank, or we in the bank and I, look at the world in general, at what we are doing in particular, is really always look at the glass half full. We need to have this optimistic view and this forward-looking view, otherwise we would be seriously in the wrong business. So yes, there are issues, yes, there are challenges, but what I'd like to look at and really push are the opportunities that are very much here on the table, and we need to seize them because they are seizable. You mentioned the broad outlook. If you look at where the world is going right now, let's say over the coming couple of years, the way we see it is that after a period of reasonable growth, what we see coming is, frankly, some gathering clouds. Gathering clouds because of what's happening around the world in terms of tensions when it comes to the global trading system. The whole China-US competition change, and frankly the rest. When you look at how the US is pushing its own agenda now when it comes to trade, one is wondering whether we are going to be going back to the general agreement of tariffs and trade and abandoning the WTO. So we have that coming. Second, the debt crisis around the world, in particular when it comes to a number of large developing countries. We see it in Argentina, we see it in Brazil, we see it in Turkey, and frankly, we see it in Lebanon. It's been there for quite some time.
We're coming back to that.
and in a number of other countries where debt is really rising, and that's really an issue that we need to be looking at very, very carefully. And then you have other tensions, geopolitical tensions that are very much there. So when you look at all this, clearly what's coming down the stretch is not as promising as one would like it to be. And because of that, we in MENA should have, but need to now anyway, because it's never too late, really engage even more decisively in economic reforms, because that's the only way we can weather, the shocks that are coming our way. We cannot have countries that are already fragile, countries that are going through a difficult time, internally being hit by this looming global economic difficulties. So this is, broadly speaking, how we see, what's happening around the world. When it comes to MENA, look at a couple of numbers. If you look at the growth outlook, it's really, some of my colleagues are saying modest, 1.5% growth outlook for the whole MENA region. It's not modest, it's really weak, in particular when we look at where we should be. And if we want to really and seriously talk about absorbing the youth bulge, and we'll talk about it later when it comes to presenting the enlarged MENA strategy. We look today at a huge number of young people coming on the job market. And if there is no possibility to create jobs, if you don't have the environment for these jobs to be, up and coming, well, we will be creating, looking at, rising tensions, rising frustrations, and clearly a situation that could become a situation of, very high pressure on all of us. So we really need to, aim higher when it comes to growth, meaning aim higher when it comes to policy reforms. We need, all of us, each country of the MENA region, from Morocco all the way to Iran, passing by every single other country. Reforms are not moving as fast as they should. Decision makers are not aiming as high as they should. And frankly, we see it when it comes to the outcome. The outcomes are, not where they should be. So this is the gloomy part of it. But I have the other part of it, and I'm happy to engage in that, later in the conversation.
Okay. Well, building on this and what you just mentioned, given the challenges that are coming globally, but also the challenges that are more particular to the region, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about this. And this is a region that is facing massive population movements. We have, from Syria alone, we have 5 million refugees, 7 million internally displaced in Syria, in Yemen 11 million. So the numbers of people who've been uprooted is massive. And this is just one part of the picture. There's the issue of children who are out of school and therefore, or are not getting, even though they're in school, they're not getting the proper education, and therefore their future outlooks are quite dismal. They have no skills with which to enter into to fend for themselves, not even enter a job market, no skills with which to fend for themselves in the future. We have governance challenges. This is a region that is beset by governance challenges. The 2011 uprisings were very much about not just the inequalities, but also the governance challenges that countries across this region have been following. And we have security challenges. The amount of challenges in various areas of this region are tremendous. At least 4 countries in the region are going through a very devastating conflict. So can you, given this very dismal background, can you perhaps speak a little bit to the new World Bank strategy, which, from what I've seen, is quite novel. It's a move away from the traditional approach of the World Bank towards its strategies. It's trying to come up with a new and a different, if you want, at least headlines and kind of pillars on which to base its policy recommendations. So can you speak to us a little bit about this, and what are the pillars and what are the strategies, and how you see this coming together?
Yes, thank you. Let me say a couple of things. You mentioned 2010, 2011, and you're absolutely right. What happened in our region starting from 2010, I would even say from 28, but from 2010, is the result of frustrations stemming from, obviously, economic difficulties, but also from the fact that people felt that their voice was not reaching the decision makers, that voice didn't count. People feeling that the governance system in their countries would not allow them to reach the level of their ambitions. Young people who felt that their future was closed to them. So, these young people got to a place where, they couldn't take it anymore. But let's step back a bit. why was it that for years we were looking at MENA, Middle East and North Africa, as a stagnatingly stable region? Nothing was happening. I'm not saying that there was no issue in Iraq and no issue in Palestine, but broadly speaking, place was kind of stable. Nothing really stagnatingly stable. Nothing was happening. No reforms were moving ahead. Everybody was kind of okay with the way things were going. Well, I believe that, and during that time, there was some kind of a tacit, even explicit social contract between the people, the citizen, and their governments. Social contract, very easy to outline. It has two components. I give you free goods, you shut up. That was it. I give you education, free, almost free. I give you health, free, almost free, even though of questionable quality. I give you social protection. I give you water. I give you sanitation. I give you electricity that you pay peanuts. But in the good sense of the whole other side of the equation, leave us alone. We are building the state. We are building the nation after independence. On the bad sense, shut up. We are, moving ahead with our corrupt ways, and we don't want anybody to come in the way. So that social contract got to a place where both sides could not meet their ends of the bargain. The governments could not keep paying for all of those free goods because they couldn't. Money wasn't there anymore. And that really blew up in everybody's face when we faced the 2008 global financial crisis. That was a huge hit. I remember it happening in a number of our countries. In my own country, where that social contract was very much there. Tunisia. Well, I remember 2008 was a terrible year because people started feeling the heat. On the other side of that bargain, the young people weren't happy with just having food and health and education. They wanted to have a voice. They wanted to get out. They wanted to decide for their own future. And what they saw around them was not allowing them to do that. So there was this explosion that happened. That old social contract wasn't working anymore. We need to renew it. And that's how we, in the bank, obviously with a number of others, but we thought about this renewed social contract. How can we engage with the youth, with the governments, with civil society, so that we can build a totally new arrangement between the society, within the society, between citizen and their government. So that was our first pillar, what Hafiz, my predecessor, used to call the mother of all pillars. That's what we should be doing above everything else. But then we were looking at the situation around us. What we saw is that, because of what happened with the Arab Spring, we had refugees, violence, we had, instability and tensions. So we needed to have a strong focus on resilience, on refugees, a strong focus on, this displacement of population that we saw happening. And we saw it here in Lebanon, in Jordan, in other places. The bank stepped up to the plate and tried to do as much as we could to try to mitigate the adverse impact of the Syria crisis through its refugees in Lebanon and in Jordan. We created the new instruments for financing that, and we tried as much as we could to help. The third dimension of it is the issue of regional integration or regional cooperation. If you look at, broadly speaking, MENA region is the least integrated region economically in the whole world. Well, there is something to be done about that. And look at the other part of the Middle East and North Africa, the Maghreb. We had studies done, something that we call the cost of the non-Maghreb. Some of them were even showing two points of GDP a year because of the lack of interaction between Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, Mauritania. Why? Why? Because you had an issue with the Western Sahara. Why? Because, you know, unfortunately, there was no realization that, you know, you could trade between Morocco and Tunisia without going, you know, through Marseille. You know, so these are basically, you know, issues that needed to be looked at very carefully. The fourth issue was, you know, a conversation that had to do with the resilience of the MENA region, climate change. You know, when you look at desertification, when you look at water, incredibly challenging issue. Yesterday we had a conversation at AUB about water, and it was rather, you know, with some feisty students there, but that's good because, you know, it is true that it is a fundamental strategic resource. Lebanon is blessed by, you know, with a lot of that, not managed the way it should be, but blessed still. But you go next door, manage it, not manage, they don't have it.
When you talk about the coming water wars.
Exactly, and there are opportunities to make of water a factor of peace rather than a factor of war. And that too, I am happy to be controversial and to push it, but I think it is very, very important in our region to make sure that we can, you know, share the wealth and make people who don't have it pay for it, of course, but share it anyway. So that was, broadly speaking, our strategy, and it is still very much our strategy because the reality hasn't changed dramatically since the time we put it together. But what we thought is that we should have a broadening of that strategy. Because what we see today happening, and you mentioned it, the young people, when I look at down the stretch, and I'm sorry, my colleagues heard me say that 10,000 times, and I'm sick of it myself, but I keep saying it. By 2050, we will be seeing 300 million young people knocking at the door of the job market. 300 million, almost the entire population of MENA today. MENA today's population is about 380 to 400 million people. 300 million young people trying to get a job. But we are not going to be waiting until 2050 for that. You know, every single year between now and then, the Middle East and North Africa countries need to create 10 million new jobs. If you look at what's being created right now and the 10 million, the delta is wide. We really need to bridge that gap, and we need to do it. How are we going to be doing it? So we started thinking about it. You know, we need to be both opportunistic, tactical, and strategic, meaning we need to look at what's feasible now, but also down the road. We need to build for down the road. That's how, you know, statesmen think. You know, they don't think about, you know, let's do something to patch, you know, to patch a problem now. You need to think down the stretch. Down the stretch, you need to really engage very heavily in education, in human capital. This is really what makes this region rich. It's human capital. It's young people. It's educated young people. Because if you look at the region today, it's, you know, we are far ahead. Education is not where it should be, frankly. The curriculum are not necessarily, they don't necessarily jive with the needs of the job market of today, or let alone the job market of tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. But people have that, you know, basic level of education that can help them move forward. Second, new technologies. Everybody in MENA has this. And I'm sure that if I had a poll here, everybody has at least one, possibly even two. I don't know how many you have of those. Saroj here has two, you see? So, you know, everybody is connected. And everybody is connected socially. But how about taking that social connection to a place where it becomes wealth-making instrument? How can we take it to a place where, you know, connectivity becomes, you know, an economic means? Connectivity becomes a growth creator type of a factor. This is where we would like to go. And that means a number of things. That means, you know, digital payments, allowing all these startups. Many of them I saw here in Lebanon at the Beirut Digital District. But you know what, from Morocco to Iran, each one of these countries has tons of young people, you know, creating, you know, new small enterprises through technology, selling, buying, exchanging. In Algeria, of all places, where, you know, the mindset has always been socialist, square. You go talk to these people, young people, the only thing they ask us is get the government off of our backs because we can do marvels. And they are, by the way. And you take each one of the countries. They are doing tremendous stuff. But they cannot trade, they cannot get paid, they cannot pay. They need to go through, rounds, etc. Well, we need to work with them to help them with the central banks and others. We also need to help in putting together, regulations, not laws, because I'm a lawyer, and I have a problem with laws because they are so, rigid. You need very soft regulations that would, one, give confidence to the investors in these startups, because nobody will come and put money without some kind of predictability, without some kind of a broad framework. But at the same time, making sure that those regulations will not constrain an industry that is fast-moving, that is transforming every single day. Whatever you do today will not be true tomorrow. So you need something that would allow you to be innovative, creative, without being constrained, and innovative and creative, and giving confidence to those who will go from being angel investors, your brother, whatever, putting some money into a startup, to somebody who is really there to make money because he or she believes in it. And the last point, is the private sector. We need to really get away from this deep conviction that people have in MENA that the public sector, maybe not necessarily in Lebanon, but all around, that the public sector is the key to everything. Not true. If there is one real, sustainable engine for growth, it is the private sector. Obviously, you need the public sector. You need rules and regulations. You need regulatory agencies. But these should not be the be-all and end-all. The be-all and end-all is, creativity, entrepreneurship, and the private sector. That needs to be done in terms of the reality of things, and we'll push it, but also in terms of the curriculum. You need for those kids to learn that from when they are in school, so that the whole conversation turns from what do you want to be when you are, when you grow up, and what would make you comfortable? Either becoming a functionary at the ministry of this, or becoming an entrepreneur, a creator, etc. Role models need to change. So voila. So this is, broadly speaking, the kind of enlarged strategy that we are putting on the table, and I'm happy to go into more details in terms of how we will be pushing to implement it. And we'd like to get ideas from you, actually, so you help us implement this strategy.
Let me just, I'll move on to another point which is related to the regional integration bit. But before that, no, it's your floor. No, but there's another, just to kind of add a little bit, I think it's great that you're emphasizing the importance of the private sector, the regulatory role of the public sector. Perhaps one thing that is missing from the conversation also is the potential role of AI, artificial intelligence, and automation. There was a recent report that predicted that close to 25% of jobs in this region may disappear, current jobs may disappear as a result of AI in the next decade or so. So I think this is something also we need to take into account when we're talking about job creation. The one concern I have is when we overemphasize issues of entrepreneurship and small business enterprises, because again, these will not have, and maybe they will, it's actually for you to answer whether they would have the capacity to generate talking about 300 million jobs that are needed. It's hard to fathom that these could be created mainly only by an entrepreneurial mindset, and perhaps this connection between education and the labor market can also, reform of educational system is also, and again, this I would have a question on for the bank, because part of the resistance to reform of educational systems in this region has been the lack of interest in developing critical minds, which is fundamentally important for any kind of entrepreneurial spirit or creativity. So how would we go about squaring that circle? Because if it's just a regular reform of, let's just teach you how to program and how to learn some, new computer skills or whatever, that's not going to get to what you're driving at.
Absolutely.
So this is, if you want, we can leave this to
No, I mean,
later.
actually,
Okay.
I have a couple of comments on this.
Okay.
One, in terms of the artificial intelligence, you're absolutely right. And actually, we just published a couple of interesting pieces, actually. One is the World Development Report. Every year, the World Bank Group publishes a World Development Report. We select a theme. This time around, it was the future of work. And you are absolutely right, because obviously, when we look at it, you will have a number of jobs that will be destroyed. By the way jobs were destroyed in the 19th century with the first industrial revolution, things, people recover because you have, when you destroy a job, you ideally would create one or two more. So this is a conversation to be had. Now, what's the most interesting thing? I was talking to a number of people. We all read a book. This gentleman, Noah Harari. I don't know whether.
Yes. Sapiens or?
No, the last one,
The last
21
21
answers for the 21st century.
25.
There was something that is really frightening about what he was saying. Today when you talk about joblessness, when you talk about people being without a job, there is still that capacity, that possibility that somebody stays without a job for a week, 10 days, a month, 2 months, a year, but still be able to come back. So they're still part of the society. But artificial intelligence may actually get people to become, listen to this, irrelevant. Irrelevant. It's not that you don't have a job. You are irrelevant. Nobody cares about you. That's finished. You are nothing. And this is a conversation that we should be having. How can you, with this new dynamic, avoid for people to be irrelevant and help people? And we need to create a totally new way of social protection. And this is something that the bank is thinking through very, very seriously.
Universal basic income, perhaps?
One of many possibilities. So there is a need for that, and there is a need for us to think about it. And by the way, my colleagues in the Middle East and North Africa region are now putting their minds together to put a plan for that, so that we can engage in a constructive conversation on that particular issue.
Great.
Second issue, the issue of entrepreneurship. I may disagree with you. Entrepreneurship is the key. That's how you create. That's how you develop. There is no way. It's either you are an entrepreneur and you are in the private sector, or you go and sit in a ministry. But I fully understand when you say that it should not all be about new technologies. Of course, and by the way, new technologies have ripple effects all through. It's not just one thing. And my colleague sitting there, Nabila, earlier was reminding all of us that new technologies doesn't just mean digital technologies. It's a universe out there that can be here. And the last point is on education. And there too, we just published a very interesting piece of analytical work on education in MENA. And generally speaking, the issue is not education. The issue is learning. We are too educated, meaning we are too framed. You need to learn, and need to learn how to learn, because the learning process is a never-ending story, and things are moving so fast in this day and age that whatever you know today will not necessarily be relevant tomorrow. So there is a need for all of us, to be in that mindset. Always there to learn new things. Always there to make sure that we are relevant through, having a flexibility and agility in our minds that will allow us to absorb more, and to absorb more what is relevant. Easier said than done, but that's the way to go.
Couldn't agree with you more, especially on the learning part. So let me move to the issue of you're calling for increased regional integration. I think this is it's very noble, but it's one I think that has been repeatedly called for in this region for at least the last 4 or 5 decades, if not more. It's interesting that you're calling for this in a context today where there is increasing fragmentation and polarization in this region, and where the only semi-functional sub-regional integration, the GCC, practically, to all intents and purposes, has fallen apart. So from the perspective of the bank, how will it work towards achieving regional integration? How receptive will the government? And I understand the logic of saying this will create trust, potentially, if you can get them to just implement their one road, their public transport. I mean, there's so many areas of potential integration across the region, including trade and others, customs union. I mean, many of these have been discussed since the 50s and 60s, and yet none have been achieved. How can we achieve them today, and how is the bank planning to go about them and planning to convince member countries that this is in our collective interest as a region?
Let me start with a smile in a way. You know, forget about the bank. Look at the FIFA, the International Federation of Football. Now they're asking Qatar to organize this World Cup with 48 countries, and obviously they cannot. So now they are forcing Qatar to open up possibly to other countries so that they can favor more of a regional conversation. So, you know, so that's one of the attempts. Why not? After all, Europe started with taking two of the main drivers of wars, that was coal and acier and steel, you know, and making an association and then making Europe out of those. Take away from people those two, you know, materials that actually helped build weapons and fuel wars and make of them instruments of peace.
Away oil?
Use water. So anyway, what I'm saying is that you're absolutely right. When you look at the reality today, you know, from all the angles, you know, things are not very encouraging. But things are also a bit encouraging.
Okay.
When I look today at, you know, bits and pieces of engagement, we were talking earlier about, you know, young people, entrepreneurs, startups. When I was in Algeria last time, I was talking to these young people, and they were telling me that in spite of the issues between Algeria and Morocco, you know, they were trading, you know, services and ideas and, you know, intellectual goods that they were getting paid for between the two countries. You know, interesting. In spite of the fact that, you know, formally they don't have, you know, these kind of exchanges. There are ways of helping, you know, through the private sector, through people who are making money out of it. There are ways, for instance, in having, you know, banking sector. You know, there is a Moroccan bank sitting in Tunisia. You have Turkish banks here, Lebanese banks in other places. People trading. That doesn't happen overnight. You need to keep pushing. Our view is that, and this is what we are doing, we put together studies and cases to show how much money, how much growth, how much jobs you can create by, you know, engaging in these regional cooperation, not to say integration, because that's the only way forward. If you look around today, around the world today, each one of the regions has, you know, a sizable and efficient, you know, set of organizations. Africa, look at ECOWAS, you know, look at Asia, look at Latin America. And in our Middle East and North Africa region, we have empty shells, and they are not working.
Is there a way to push for this?
There is a way. In our view, is really to make the case every single time that what you are losing is way more than what you think, you know, you would, how should I put it? What, you know, when I talk about the cost of the non-migrant, for instance, we said it, and we are still saying it. And when we talk to each one of the leaders of these countries, they do recognize it, they regret it, and they say, look, we will do something about it. But at least there is that conscience that something is to be done. I look today at, you know, Iraq and Jordan. There is an opening there, and something is happening between the two countries. I look at Egypt and Jordan as well. There is something happening there. I understand that, you know, politically, so from time to time, things, there are openings, and then they are short-lived. But we need to keep repeating, because there is no other way. Our markets individually are too small. maybe aside from Egypt and even that, we need to enlarge, that broad conversation. We as the bank, we don't, we cannot change everything, but we will keep through our thinking, through our studies, through our dialogue to push that particular agenda.
You mentioned something just moving on a little bit on the issue of unemployment, since it's something that I know the bank has focused considerably on, particularly youth unemployment, but the generation of employment. You talk about the need for capture-proof policies for the region and for the business sector as a means for creating jobs. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by capture-proof and how you see that coming about?
What happened in our countries and that led, to the Arab Spring is precisely that. It's rent-seeking and capture of the economies by elites. We saw it happening in each one of the countries. And by the way, we're still seeing it happening in a number of our countries. Very possibly, when you read our we had an instrument.
One on Tunisia.
One on Tunisia, but even here in Lebanon, a few years back, we had the strategic SCD, systematic country diagnostic.
Which actually, yes, it focused on
what
this.
we said in there is that we need to get away from this idea that, the situation is terrible in Lebanon because there is sectarianism. You know what? Sectarianism, possibly. Reality is that there is, a capture of a number of sectors by certain elites. Then you put any mask over that doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, this is what's happening. And it's happening here, it's happening in Morocco, it's happening in Tunisia, it's happening in Egypt, in all the countries, at various levels. And this is something that we are looking at. We say it. Sometimes we say it a bit too late. In Tunisia, we said it, unfortunately, after the whole thing happened. And we should have been more out there. But this is, again, because at the time, we were complacent. The place is stable, the place is growing okay, the place is clean, the place is governed. It's not giving any headache to anybody. So leave it alone. Well, it started giving headache to people because the issue was not addressed. So contestability, transparency, strengthening the institutions, strengthening, governance, and making sure that, we have all the instruments to call it when it is corruption. We need really to be there, and we are doing it. So it is absolutely crucial that we keep in mind that, we don't have taboos on that. Okay. We say it and we call it as we see it.
As you see it. Okay. I'm going to move to two questions that are related. One is on recovery and reconstruction, which is also a strategic pillar for the bank. Particularly in terms of tackling the consequences of conflict. I mean, we're talking about a region where the bank has estimated, or the UN has estimated, $170 billion needed to rebuild Syria. We're talking about $200 billion for Libya, $274 billion for Yemen.
74.
74.
Okay, not 75, not 73.
74. This is according to your strategy,
Yeah,
not mine.
No.
1.4 billion for Gaza, 443 million for 4 cities in Iraq, and only 4 cities. We're not talking about. So the needs are tremendous, and yet the means are not as great. But where also the destruction is not just about the billions, where the destruction is the lives and livelihoods of people who have been forced to flee. And in a context where legitimacy, so reconstruction is not just about the physical reconstruction, it's not a technical issue. It's a place where the legitimacy of the ruling elite, of states, of governments, and the institutions is very much in question. And I'm putting it mildly as far as some countries are concerned. So how would the bank go around operating in a difficult environment like this? And maybe I should just tack onto this because the strategy also mentions the potential for working with subnational actors as part of its partnerships, and even mentions the possibility of working with some actors that could be part of armed groups. So, I mean, I'm just quoting. So my question here is, how does the bank foresee this process happening? I know that there has been work that has begun, and it's good that it's begun in terms of what is needed, but how does it foresee this thing unfolding, as I said, particularly in contexts where legitimacy is undermined, state institutions are fragile, and it's, questions of even, that are important to the bank, including fiduciary oversight, is very fraught with difficulties. Let's put it this way.
Yeah, that's a huge question. I mean, it's a very important one. We have, it was not, the bank when it was created was the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. It was at the time to reconstruct Europe. And we did a lot there, but obviously it was post-war type of environment. It wasn't smack in the middle of the tensions. The reality that is now imposing itself to us, to the whole world, is that we have unfortunately more and more of those places where tensions flare up and where wars are really taking everybody. So we first of all, we thought that it would be very important for the World Bank to be part of this conversation. Going back to what I was talking about earlier, we have these World Development Reports every year. In 2011, we had one that was really a very important one, precisely on post-conflict and how the bank engaged in conflict situation, in violence and in post-conflict situations. That report was delivered at a time when there was no refugee crisis, when there was no Iraq and ISIS, when Yemen was not where it is right now, etc. Since then, we have developed new ways of engaging. And frankly, it was an iterative process. We were learning as we were doing. What we learned is that it is relatively easy to rebuild, brick and mortar. I'm saying relatively easy because it's not easy. When you are in the middle of violence, it's not easy. But what is even more difficult, what is really difficult, is to rebuild the social fabric. To bring societies that were really torn into pieces, bringing them back together. It is a long-term, proposition. It's not instant coffee. It takes time to get there. And this is really something that we are thinking about, that we are working on. Now, we have engaged literally with money and ideas in places like Iraq after the whole ISIS situation, and Sarraj is still smack in the middle of it. It's a very, very tough process where not only do we need to, again, rebuild bridges and villages and towns and schools and hospitals, you also need to rebuild the trust of the people in their government. And that was actually the first ask from the then Iraqi Prime Minister, Abadi, when he came to Washington in 2014, I think it was. His ask was, how can you help us to rebuild the credibility of the state? And that was the main purpose of our engagement there. Because without it, the reason that led tribes to throw everything and jump, on the bandwagon of ISIS, are still there. The difficult conversation between them and the government, the whole sectarian tensions, etc. So you're right. We need, when we move there, to have a very clear and precise reading of the political economy, of who is doing what to whom, if I may say, in that place, a sense of the social fabric of the place, and also a sense of the reason that led to a vulnerability and a fragility that allowed, a few gangsters to just come in and take over the country. Who would have believed? And let me be a bit provocative here. It is true, and we know it, that there were foreign interferences. But foreign interferences are never successful if you are strong inside, and if you are strong, in your own country. you could not break that. But when you have that vulnerability that comes in because of the institutions that are weak, because of the social fabric that is, being diluted, and because, frankly, there is this whole governance that is not making people feeling that they are part of a community, then yes, anybody can come in and anybody can break whatever you have. Last couple of more points. The subnationals, yes, we engage in places. It's not a question of subnational the way you would look at it, like a province, but in a country, you may very well have a pocket that is in deep conflict, but the rest is in a situation of fragility. And then we can engage in that part in order precisely to prevent the contagion in a way. So this is one. So, and the second part is all of these numbers that people are throwing around. It's good to have numbers, but frankly, I am not sure that scientifically one can stand by them. When somebody tells me that you need 172.5 billion to rebuild, how credible is that? And I remember many of them came from the World Bank from years back, to a point where at some point there was a number that was thrown by somebody at ESCWA that came to the bank, and we kind of said, why not? And then I was sitting one day, I was the chief of staff for the president of the bank a couple of a year ago or something. He was sitting in a meeting with Angela Merkel, and she threw that number at him, So everybody was, what that number that came from here went to Washington, then went to Berlin, then came back to us, and that number had, frankly, no real scientific basis for it. So I would not. Yes, it's going to cost a lot of money, that's for sure. But I'd be cautious in terms of throwing numbers on the table, because we cannot back them up with a straight face.
The 170 was a conservative number. I've heard 300
billion.
Oh,
very possibly.
No,
very possibly.
The numbers have been thrown. You're absolutely right about the numbers. Yep. The last question before we open it up to the audience. We can't be in Lebanon and not ask about Lebanon. So perhaps we can get you to say a few words about the economic and financial outlook for this country, and given the daily predictions of doom and gloom and collapse, and there's an impending catastrophe that's been hanging over us for quite some time. So perhaps we can get your views on this.
Very briefly, and maybe to the point. Remember, for years now, people, us, the IMF, and others have been saying, still saying, that Lebanon is defying gravity, hanging in there and defying gravity. Now, the issue is that we all know that gravity has this very odd, tendency at,
pulling you down.
At some point. For now, it's just like that guy who jumps from the 10th floor and is still there. So far, so good, so far, so good, so far, so good, so far, so good. We'll see. But what I'm saying, true, the situation is not great. We say it when I speak in Arabic about it, because it's actually, the terminology is easier. I say, الوضع الاقتصادي دقيق. So that allows you to say something. It is critical. It is an issue. It's not new. It may very well be that things are getting worse. When I look at you need one word. Electricity. How about that? Reforming the electricity sector. Saroj is the man. Go to him, he will help you. No, seriously, it's terrible when you look at how much money is being thrown away in subsidies for an inefficient sector that is not rendering service to the people, and that is costing tons of money to and draining the budget. That's it. So you have that. It's really the main issue. Now, if you fix it, not everything else is going to be fixed, but at least you would have taken something away. Exactly. And then you have other issues. Water is an issue, big time. Connectivity, internet, to bring foreign direct investment, to bring investors to this place, you need better infrastructure, including better infrastructure when it comes to connectivity. And frankly, and this is a conversation we had yesterday at AUB, you need the person who's going to be sitting here and opening a business, so coming from, choosing a number of countries where he could actually settle and put his capital. You need him during the summertime when he goes back to his apartment, if he lives in Ashrafiyya or in Dhahia or another place. not necessarily to be waiting for the tanker truck to bring them water to their building, to have reliable water coming straight flowing into Beirut. And it's such a shame to see a country that has so much wealth in terms of water and that is not able to capture it and to use it, and possibly even to be able to put some money or some price tag on it and sell whatever is the surplus. It's a huge, it's blue gold, as I say. It's a huge opportunity that can be seized yesterday.
Thank you, Ferid. I'm going to now open it to a Q&A from the audience. Yahya and then Nabil. I'll ask everybody to please be brief so we give a chance to as many people as possible, and please introduce yourselves.
And I'll be brief too, I promise.
Yahya Hakim, Transparency International. Mr. Belhaj, I've been following all the reports of the World Bank since they were created. And it's amazing that we never had progress reports about targets that were set for 10 years or 5 years, plans, and then a year later they vanish. Nobody talks anymore about them. We start with a new millennia, with the 10-year plan. Now we have 2030, so it is a sacred goat that everybody talks about. My God, we are reaching 2030. We talked, where is 2020? Where is 2010? Where is the millennia? We never had from the bank or from the IMF or from the rest of the international bodies who are concerned with the well-being of countries like ours, unfortunately. If we talk about all the miseries that were integration, big powers want the Arab world to be integrated. This is the biggest hoax that we can talk about. What is the plan of the World Bank, for instance, to give us a chance for the refugees that we have today? What are the constructive plans or ideas where we don't go into, Byzantine discussions, arguments and discussions. Unfortunately, we are facing two worlds. It reminds me of Versailles in 1919. In 20 years later, we had another blow-up that ended up with the miseries of the whole world. Today, the Middle East is on the verge of the same conflicts that nobody is submitting any suggestion to solve them. See, the Minister State Pompeo. Mr. Pompeo, I'm talking about Mr. Pompeo came, the rest of all what he left after he's gone. See the discussions in Lebanon about all the suggestions that he made. This is only for Lebanon. We don't talk anymore about Palestine. We don't talk about Syria. We don't talk about Iraq. We are not talking anymore, for instance, about something like as critical as Sudan. Sudan, nobody talks about it.
Yeah.
Yemen, all these issues, how can you integrate them when the conflicts are so severe and serious? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. If I can just add to his point on refugees, and then maybe we can take another question from Nabil and then answer. Just on the issue of refugees, actually, I wanted to ask this earlier, which is that we know that refugees are very unlikely to return in the near future. We'd put out a study a year and a half ago that looked at the reasons for why refugees, the triggers for return. And one of the clearest outcomes was safety and security. If safety and security is not available, they can't go back. And what we're seeing in Syria today is that it's a fragile government, one that does not want people to go back anyway, but it has a very tenuous hold on many parts of Syria. And your study, actually, there's a study that came out from the World Bank that also emphasized that the issue of safety and security is paramount for people to go back. So how do we deal with this? What is the bank also proposing on this front? Just as a tag on the refugee issue. And Nabil, do you want to?
Nabil Fahad, Chamber of Commerce. You mentioned, you made a statement, rebuild the confidence in the state. I mean, I want to just talk about Lebanon. We really have a big problem here, not just as a private sector, even at the level of the citizen. We have the Sadr projects. They talk about, partnership between the private sector and the public sector. The PP law has been passed and so on. But then when we talk to investors, and we have been talking to investors over the past few months, they laugh at us, really. I mean, whether they're internally or from abroad, we are not really on the radar screen of investors for projects in Lebanon. There is no confidence in the government. There is no confidence that whatever guarantees the government is gonna give, for payments, I mean, it's absent. I mean, if we look what's happening with the contractors, with the hospitals, I mean, nobody is getting paid, and still we're trying to attract investors to come and put money into projects. When just a few years back we took away concessions or licenses of mobile phones, of electricity producers, and so on. So I think that's where we really need to work to rebuild the confidence in the government and make sure that whatever they're offering is credible and it's long term. I mean, we had participated in a presentation by Serouj on the digital economy. I think maybe some of the projects that you need to, I mean, instead of this $400 million job program that you had, which is so controversial, maybe it can be turned around into a digital, platform, and spend the money on the e-government, because you're really doing both two things: fighting corruption and at the same time, turning into an efficient state. Thank you.
Do you want to take? And then
You must have been listening, eavesdropping on a conversation I was having with Saroj on that, on the jobs project. Yeah. No, look, a couple of things. On these reports and making sure that we draw lessons. Well, maybe we should send you these reports, because we have an independent evaluation group within the bank that actually looks at what we do in terms of our own responsibility when we do analysis and when we do projects, the outcome of those, and learning and building on those to do something else differently, learning from experience. So we do have that. Now, if you're talking about broad strategy, 2020, 2030, 2040, we are the ones doing those, okay? But whatever we do, whatever we take responsibility for, we evaluate, we assess, and we try again to extract as much lessons from those so that we can keep moving ahead. Secondly, I mean, then you have a broad geopolitical statement on the big powers and whether it would let you do or not. I don't disagree, but where I have an issue is that we should not, I'm saying, putting myself as a citizen of this region, we are not sitting there doing nothing and waiting for somebody else to decide for us, because otherwise we deserve what's happening to us, okay? So we need to do something about it, one way or the other. Need to do something about it, work on forget about the World Bank, work on your own development agenda and try to push, forward something that would allow all of us, you, to be less prone to be played with, and that's the way I would say it. Again, as a citizen from the region, not as somebody sitting with the World Bank. And I would say it in my own country, when I see people coming and whining about the fact that, they are not asking, letting us do this or that. I'm sorry. We are supposed to be adults. I have enough gray hair. You just need to take responsibility for what you do or for what you let people do to you. I mean, I'm sorry to be blunt, but that's the way it is. In terms of the refugees, you are absolutely right. It is a terrible issue, and when we engaged with Lebanon and Jordan on the whole refugee crisis, we engaged with our eyes wide open, and with looking at really trying to help not to get not to get the region into a lost generation situation. When you have today, millions of refugees, including, hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of young kids, and I saw these here, and I saw them in Zatari in Jordan when I was here. What can you do about it? If you don't help them with health and with education, what are we creating? We are creating, a workforce for Daesh and for other people. We need to work and help. And at the same time, I fully understand, because I lived it here, that, it's easy to say Lebanon has been generous and it's fantastic, and you guys really have managed to to help all of these people in this country, and to do it relatively, without having an
explosion.
Exactly, without having an explosion. But at the same time, we fully understand that there is so much you can push, and there is so much you can ask from a country, in particular when the international community is not doing as much as it should, frankly. What I've been saying to my counterparts, colleagues, including the board of directors of the World Bank, is that Lebanon and Jordan are offering the world a public good, and the world is making them pay for it. And I think it is absolutely unacceptable. And that's why we have tried, in whichever way possible, to create instruments, financing instruments, that would be as concessional as possible, even though it's never enough. These should be grants, as concessional as possible, to help Lebanon and to help Jordan manage, a crisis that others haven't managed. When we look at Lebanon, the example that we've always been giving is, imagine the whole population of Mexico going to the United States in the span of a few months. Imagine that. I know somebody who would not be very happy. So we need to be conscious of that fact. Nabil, you're absolutely right. I have nothing to add to that. You're absolutely right. Clearly today, there is a confidence in the state and the institutions that needs to be, recreated and reinvented. Whether it is in Lebanon or in any other place. If you want to attract people in a world where competition is very fierce for capital, very fierce for investment, well, you need to get your acts together and make sure that you are attractive. And by being attractive, meaning you have predictability, you have transparency, you have good governance, and you have services that are reliable. Many countries have that. Lebanon needs to strive to that. And that's why, going back to what we were discussing earlier, both electricity and water and internet, etc., are important. But what's even more important is that, when you seek redress, if you have an issue with a company or with you can go to a tribunal and get redress, be treated fairly. If you have an issue with a particular public service, you need to be able to have, the possibility to go and seek compensation. And these are issues that are absolutely fundamental to any countries, particularly those who want to attract more foreign investment.
One word. Do you know, in the Lebanese government, in the Lebanese administration, there are no procedures manuals in any ministry? How can you have SADR or have any other development plan when you don't have even a miser project with a manual to really say how you proceed in giving this service? The whole Lebanese administration has no procedures manuals. How can you have reform if you don't have procedures?
It's true. And then Nasib. There are two questions. Yeah, Muslim. You were raising your... No, sorry, no, you were not raising your hand?
Me?
Yes?
Yes.
Oh.
Sorry, I was pointing behind me. My name is Munir Mahmalat from the Lebanese Center for Policy Studies. So I hear from what you were telling us about the fundamental challenge that you identified, which is the employment challenge in the youth bulge, as being one that you want to tackle from the maxim of economic growth. So please let me even from the standpoint myself being an economist, challenge you on this a little bit from a little bit populistic point of view, to be a bit provocative. As I want to ask you whether this maxim wouldn't be a little bit too unidimensional, as we have seen that this might create incentives to policymakers and politicians that are eventually actually misleading and maybe even detrimental. The very fact that we have not seen as economist community for the longest time a stable region of relatively decent economic growth to breed this misery that we have been in the last couple of years is maybe testimony that we need to be a bit more creative in developing better target systems by which we guide our policy principles.
Would you pass it on, and then it's Nasif. That'll be the next round.
Okay, I'm retired Brigadier General Qasim Jammu, Lebanese Army. Actually, you mentioned about a new approach from World Bank towards fragile states in building a trust and rebuild or recreate a new partnership or social contract between people and their states or governors. I am making my thesis in PhD, it's done about fragile states and donors, about this concept. Is it fruitful or good for donors or for states itself? I read most of the reports from World Bank, and actually I didn't see this new approach you mentioned about getting this social contract between people and their governors in mass as it has to be. Because what I've read only numbers and tables about low income and GDP and how you classify these countries, and then these numbers and given to all donors, and donors are treating these countries, taking examples, many examples, Afghanistan, Somalia, Yemen, not go to other
Can we ask a
countries.
specific, because it's very general what you're asking. Is there a specific question?
Yes, specific. What are these new approaches towards this, and where we can find it? Because I didn't see it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have, should we take one
Yeah,
more
yeah,
from
please.
Nasif? Elio, please, here.
Okay, that's fine. Nasif Hatti, former diplomat.
Here's the mic.
Once a diplomat, always a diplomat.
Well, I try not to be.
A recovering diplomat.
35 years was enough.
Recovering.
I recovered. I'm in the process of, alhamdulillah, of recovering. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, just again to congratulate you for your thought-provoking expose. I felt, have been in diplomacy for 35 years at the Arab level, that we are hostage to a, what I call, political heavily weighing equation in the region, which is the following: that economic cooperation, any form of economic cooperation, is hostage to politics, and politics has been and is still hostage to personalization. I mean, we don't have a socialized politics. A good example is the last summit, supposedly to be in Beirut, economic summit, which ended up being ministerial or less than ministerial summit. I mean, so we don't have this habit of the culture of cooperation, the culture of, you know, step-by-step cooperation. But I think today, because we're all in the same boat, we're all feeling the same vulnerabilities in the region, perhaps some countries today, others yesterday, some others tomorrow, that there is the possibility of thinking along two lines, pour emprunter à nos amis européens, just to go there, to what we call the different speeds approach in certain instances. And the second approach, the geometry variable, where we could focus on certain areas. I know a bit, somehow, the Maghreb, and I remember a good friend of me telling me always, l'humain dans un état de coma, from its birth date. So when I compare it to the Arab League where I worked, and then I compare it now to the GCC, the issue, it's the same variable. It's the state at the beginning. So there is no one that's much more, how to put it, successful than the other, because the key variable is the behavior of the state, which is highly personalized. So basically, these two possibilities, and you could think together, I mean, all of us, one day, how to move by this matter, the issue-based, you know, approach, or the geometry variable, or the different speeds approach, because everybody needed at this stage. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nasif.
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, I mean, so with the gentleman, I don't disagree with you, but what I'd love to see is, you know, give me the alternative. I'm not challenging you. I'm just asking you. If you have an alternative, it would be great to discuss. And by the way, the guy who's sitting right in front of you here is our senior economist. So please let him know why growth doesn't work and why there are other ways. So, but seriously, very happy to hear that. Actually, if you leave us with your coordinates, we can send you, the documents that would respond to your query, because we have a number of analytical work and report that are not just tables and numbers, that are actually deep, analysis of situations of conflict and fragility, and that would actually give not an answer, because I don't think there is an answer, but ways that we have addressed those issues and ways that we think that the whole process should be, meaning a process that is very, very iterative. We don't know a lot about these type of situations. We are learning by doing. But every time we do something, I was mentioning to the gentleman, we do actually put that into a document, and we share it, and we exchange views on it, and we try to compare it with what's happening in other parts of the world, from the World Bank or with other organizations, so that we can, squeeze out as much knowledge and wealth from it, and learn from it. So I would really encourage you, and I'm sure that one of my colleagues will take your coordinate and send you that. Your Excellency, what can I say? You are I know, but it's okay. No, you're absolutely right. I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all. The region is, people talk about MENA, but the region is very diverse. From oil exporters to oil importers, to places where conflicts are open, to places where conflicts are latent, and you don't know where things are. Places where international organizations are kind of working okay. GCC was mentioned by Maha, or places that like that UMA you're absolutely right. It was born comatose, and it's still there. But thank God, but it hasn't died, which is quite a miracle. So no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I have nothing else to comment on it. But you're absolutely right. We need to have a very differentiated approach to each one of the regions of MENA. Yeah.
We'll take a couple of questions in the back, and then I'm going to add one. There's the microphone is right there.
I am Mansour Abdallah. I am a retired ambassador also. I have a little question. Do you think if we buy 10 fishing boats and fill them with refugees, send them to Cyprus, Syria will be stable, and your reports will say that life is wonderful there, so they can go? Or no? This is what Erdogan did to you, and you were happy. And you enjoyed it. No, not to you, to the West.
So my answer is no.
We start sending refugees by boat? I don't know. Are you waiting for this? Maybe. Because we cannot take it anymore. And you've seen maybe the reports about the Litani and the Bekaa Valley. It's too much. And the West knew about it before it happened. At least 10 years before it happened. Because I knew about it 2 years before it happened.
I'm not sure. I don't know.
I'm not sure I understood, but
that's fine.
If the question is, shall we put people on boats and send them? I would say no. But that's fine. I don't think we have enough boats to take people to Cyprus.
I don't think that will resolve the problem. But anyway, the issue is not the West declaring Syria
Tunis,
safe. It's Syria becoming safe.
مرحبا بهم.
تفضل. There's a question there.
Hello, my name is Sulaim Razak, and I'm a member at the Youth Action Group at the World Bank. My questions are going to be a bit different from what they've been saying. I just have, first of all, a comment about the use of digital economy or moving into a digital economy. Moving into or shifting towards a digital economy will not solve the issue of legitimacy, political legitimacy. It will only tackle bureaucracy, and it will only tackle the inefficiencies that are present within the government, but will not actually enhance the credibility of the government if not implemented right. This is a comment. Another issue that I would like to talk about actually two issues. First of all, being it's a bit specific. I'm very keen to understand how is the new project, the new economic development projects, how are they tackling unemployment and employment opportunities from an employer's perspective? Because the job nature is changing, and with the instabilities and the influx of refugees in the country, the nature of the job and the requirements of the job tasks and the descriptions are changing. So how does these development projects tackle these issues? Another issue that I have is we all focus on, I've actually attended a recent talk by the chief economist at the World Bank that talked about the debt crisis in Lebanon and how much we have a lot of debt. Now, we all understand, we all acknowledge the idea that debt is basically a barrier towards economic development.
Yep.
Then why is it that a lot of the projects that are suggested by the international organizations, be it the World Bank or whatnot, actually require countries to attain more debt in order to cover the costs of these projects, while it is obvious that it's hindering its economic process?
To what, I'm sorry, you mentioned require the country to what?
To kind of acquire more debt,
Oh,
to
okay,
get
okay,
more
gotcha,
debt in order to
gotcha,
cover the...
Gotcha. Yeah.
That's fine. Can
Okay.
I tack on a
Yes,
small
yes,
question
yes.
on the issue of going back to refugees and burden sharing and regional integration? I thought about it. I was looking at the numbers from the Brussels conference, the last Brussels conference, and it struck me how the least amounts donated were actually from the region. They were very much at the lower threshold. Is this a place where we can begin talking about burden sharing and not integration, but cooperation around the issue of refugees and what can be done?
Okay.
Just, is this something the bank could help with?
We always can help with many things. We cannot do everything, but we can. This particular question, I would have an answer, but I would not say it here. But no, seriously, no, but because I guess people give money, have their interests. So to answer our good friend there, and a couple of things. One, I personally believe very strongly that digitalization brings about transparency, brings about more effectiveness, efficiency, and very much brings about more reliability when it comes to the transactions. So instead of, and you can take it at every, even any basic public service. You're asking for something when you have, that service being digitalized, when that service is being managed properly. You can actually assess the service that you're getting. You can see the number of steps that are being taken, and actually you can make it more efficient. So in my view, it improves governance, and it improves the reliance and on the state and your own confidence in the state. Because if the state allows you, go to a tribunal and you have a case there. Years ago, you have stacks of papers, and then the clerk can take it from up, put it down, and now if everything is computerized, you know where your case is, you know who's going to be the judge, who's going to be dealing with it, and you are basically justice come to you rather fast. As they say, and justice delayed is justice denied. So normally it should help you, and that's not just that. My colleague, he left, told me that today he was able to get his national passport in 24 hours. Well, it brings it here. He got his passport. I don't know where he lives, somewhere in Baabda or something. So it gives you trust that things can move faster. Anyway, and the third point relates to the whole debt conversation. You're absolutely right. Debt is a drag on development, drag on growth, because the more debt you have, the more debt you have to repay, and the less fiscal space you have to invest in productive projects. At the same time, when you talking about the bank, you look at the cost of our debt, it is way lower than what Lebanon can get on the international markets. So, in best of circumstances, taking debt from the bank would actually help you reprofile your own broad debt. I'm not saying, but the debt that you take from the bank is not just to do that. It's actually to finance projects that are supposed to develop the country and are supposed to be bringing about more growth into the country. Unless the gentleman here disagrees with me on the growth issue. So there is good and bad debt, okay? So we believe, and we strongly actually, feel that our debt, when it is put, for good use, as it is when it comes to our projects, is actually a good debt, because there is no a country in the world that doesn't contract debt to finance its development.
Farid? Okay, it seems like we still have one more question. This will be the last question, and I think we'll wrap it up. Are you okay with taking one more question?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
This will be the last question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Hi, I'm Farah Kanan. I'm with the Daily Star. I have a question that's in a similar vein as previous questions, but Cedra has $11 billion that they have promised us. Obviously, they need to see reforms, and it's very clear. Well, those reforms are not, I don't think they're happening anytime soon. I mean, there's been a lot of talk, a lot of promises, a new government, blah, blah, blah. What do you think, or how willing will they be to give us at least part of that money that we really need if they see that the reforms aren't happening? That was zero, exactly,
Zero.
Exactly.
And we need to make it very, very clear.
Exactly.
Zero. And this is something that every single decision maker in Lebanon should know. There will be no cedr if there is, cedr is a contract. You have reforms that can be financed. Well, if you don't have reform, there is no finance. And we need to clearly put that on the table and make sure that people understand that. And I think people understand that. I'm not saying that they are not.
Well, so the other part of my sorry, the other part of my question was sorry, I lost my train of thought. Okay, you said that as citizens, so not as someone working at the World Bank, but as a citizen, you say you deserve the people you put in power. Basically, I mean, I'm paraphrasing. You deserve the people you put into power, right? No, I agree. I just didn't want to, I wanted to make sure I'm paraphrasing. But what do you do when you're entrenched? And I believe that a lot of Lebanese people, if not all, are supremely fed up. I don't think there's a lot of people that are happy with with the government, with the way things are happening. But what do you do when you have a system that is so deeply entrenched? I mean, people get frustrated because nothing is changing. Nothing has been changing. People get frustrated. So what do you say to citizens that see a system that is not changing anytime soon? They know it. And there's no other way out than doing what happened in other countries, namely start a revolution, which people don't want to because we went through a civil war. We have another war happening next to us, another war on the other side. So, in short, if people want to see change, when they're battling against a system that is not willing to change, what do you do?
Thank you, Farah.
A quick one. When we worked on this
the country
systematic country diagnostic, one day I will remember the whole thing. When we worked on that, I remember we had a lot of consultations and discussions, etc., with people, notably civil society. That was a time when you had this whole Talat Rihatkom thing,
campaign, yes.
And one of the questions, I remember having asked one of these young people, whether when it comes right down to it, when you are going to go and vote, are you voting for a program, or are you voting for the guy who is representing your village or your community? And you'd be surprised. Those are the guys who said, at the end of the day, I would vote for my community. Well, we have an issue there. Because you are not taking the politics at a place where it should be. We are taking it back to, our comfort zone. But that was 3 years ago. It may very well be that things have changed since. I don't know.
Not really. Okay. All right. Farid, I want
Been
to
very
thank you.
frank here.
No, actually, I think this is what has endeared you to the public. I want to thank you so much, Farid.
My pleasure.
Please join me in thanking Farid
Thank you.
Ferid Belhaj, Vice President of the World Bank for the MENA region, for joining us and for your very frank conversation.